We should be. And of course, this is going to take like 30 seconds. Just bear
That's
with
all right.
me. We should be.
Come on. Shoot this reply real quick.
Everything takes longer when there's anticipation.
Unwatched phone never rings, you know.
That's exactly right. All right, let's see. Here we go.
Yeah. That's the new cook pot. I get it.
Oh, yeah, I think I said that wrong. Watch phone never rings. Yeah.
I like it. Especially when it's a pretty girl on the other end or something.
All right, we should be live. I think we should be good to go here in about, it's finishing up the loading.
FFT.
All right, one more second. Sorry, guys.
I like the art.
Oh, thank you. That's actually somebody that's I guess has some kind of artistic ability at the school my kids go to did it, and it's made out of, the paper is made out of different verdicts and disposition forms. And yeah, if you look close, it almost like a paper mache, but you can see like not guilties and signatures and stamps from the clerk's office and stuff like that. So it's kind of cool to look at and think about all those little, pieces, because, most of them represent people that were eventually accused of felonies, but not convicted, as we sit here and remain unconvicted felons ourselves,
Yeah, and that brings us to, so this is our first show we're doing.
Yeah,
great segue. This is our first show. Charlie and I are going to try to do this on a weekly basis with different guests. We've kind of dubbed the show Unconvicted Felons just as a play on what us two do for a living. But our goal with this is kind of just to generate positive community content is what we've said. So we want to talk to leaders in the community, whether it be that hold elected offices or business leaders or whatever it may be, and just kind of try to talk about things that matter in the world. And with that said, we're very happy to have a guest here for our first episode. I'm going to let Charlie introduce him.
And I'm going to give, a personal introduction as and I can sit here and say I'm a proud unconvicted felon and proud of this opportunity to have this conversation today. Probably thanks to that status as well, but, certainly the ability to practice law is something that comes with it, which I think is something all three of us share in common. But I was actually, everything going on is there's so much opportunity these days to really get in your emotions, anger, sadness, just all kinds of different passion emotions. And especially the more that you engage, whether it's social media, whether it's on the news, that's something, I had a feeling in my stomach last night from just, a small little segment as soon as I turned it on, and I found myself almost overwhelmed. How to engage and not do it in a place of anger and blame, but how to do it in a positive and loving way. And I remember I was getting ready to go to bed the other night and pulled up the old Facebook, which, I don't even know why, but I got to a post and it was something I wasn't expecting, something that I think had been put out there a while back. And it was a post by our first guest here on Unconvicted Felons, representative from the 132nd district, the state House of Representatives, minority leader, Robert Trammell. Does it go by Robert or Bob? What do you prefer?
Go by Bob. Bob's fine.
That's easier to remember, and
That's right.
palindromes are just so disarming. But in any event, it was this post that you'd put out there that just I needed to see in some ways. I'd had conversations, I think, that day with some other attorneys about how yes, that's infuriating. I don't know how to process. I don't know how to, be a part of the solution, how to enter the conversation. I was just trying to process that. And I guess it was almost an avoidance, but you posted something that was uplifting as a, elected leader and essentially, the minority leaders in your title. Something that I think really I was thirsty for, an example of leadership, very methodical, mechanical, and I think you enumerated some responsibilities that you feel are valuable and important, and kind of went down those, and also listed some like common sense, realistic changes we can make to our system, to our laws, in order to move the needle one step closer to equal justice for all, which I think acknowledging that it's not is tremendous. One thing particularly you said was, silence is complicity. And, but I just wanted to thank you for that. And that's kind of, talking around the next day and talking about this joint venture, obviously you came to mind, and I want to thank you for that personally. And I also want to welcome you as our first guest in that regard, and talk to you about maybe some of those things and other things that you as a lawmaker and a representative think can be done to actually make a change. There's a lot of screaming and yelling and blaming, but could you talk a little bit about some of the things you think that actually on the table and where we are right now can be part of the conversation to move that needle closer to equal justice for all and a better system?
Yeah, no. First, thank you for those kind words, Charlie and Ryan. Thank you for the chance to be a guest on your program, and particularly the inaugural guest on it.
Brave and courageous man.
Yeah, about to say that's a brave step. Yeah.
Never do another one.
First time, and I gotta say one more thing in my introduction, and I'm just going to be rude and interrupt you right there. But you have you been serving since in the House since what, 2014, 2015? Now, is that right?
Since
and you
was like 14, started serving in 15. That's right.
You fill the shoes of someone that I hold in very high regard in Carl Von Epps, who I believe was there for over 20 years, even though they tried to draw him out, or I've heard stories of how they tried to draw him out over and over. And his wife, Benita, was my, I think, fourth grade algebra teacher. So,
all right.
Everything ties together.
Yeah, back at Southside Elementary at Cannon Street in LaGrange. And so that was your predecessor, big shoes to fill, no doubt. And then as the minority leader of the House, another very impressive pair of shoes and predecessor there in Stacey Abrams, if I'm not mistaken. So
right.
I think that's pretty cool, and no pressure. You got this.
Yeah, Carl, he was the longtime representative, and was my representative for a long time, and retired. And so when he announced his retirement was when I decided to run in 2014, and has been a great mentor. And of course, Stacey was a fearless leader of the Democratic caucus for years, and was my leader when I was elected. She's gone and done some incredible things outside of the General Assembly too, and particularly in the space of advocating for free and fair elections. I think she's probably the preeminent person, in the country when it comes to fighting for those voting rights. And today, not to get detoured in there, but obviously today is primary day, June 9th, when we're taping this and doing it. And you can look on the news today, or you can look on social media, particularly like Twitter, and you can see accounts of people literally standing in line for hours to cast their vote. And in a free democratic society, voting should not be that complicated, and we should do everything we can to make voting an easy process for people, because people want to participate in that process. And when you make it complicated and you make these lines long in certain areas and certain precincts, it just undermines confidence in the outcome of the elections.
And when we know, it's almost like it's always been dancing. I think we're getting closer to talking about why it's being done. It's being done for a specific political advantage, and it's not whatever the dialogue or the narrative is that matches it. I think we finally started talking about what it really is. But Carl Von Epps and Stacey Abrams, two more great examples of leadership.
And this is getting us where I think the goal is that people are angry right now. I think it's being reflected just in the fact that there is participation in lines at the voting booths. And that's one reason we wanted to talk to you, to figure out, it's easy to be mad and yell, what are some practical things that we as a people, or the legislature, or whatever it may be, can set as goals to try to move forward as a state
together.
Well, one thing I'll say about the moment that we're in is that there's a tremendous palpable frustration about what I would call inertia or inaction, with respect to the issues that we see over and over and over again. So, George Floyd's murder was horrifying, but it wasn't the first time. And there's got to be an accountability. So there's a desire for that, but there also has to be real action to try to make sure that some of the systemic disparities that exist in policing and criminal justice, are addressed and tackled. And sometimes that means having very very hard, honest conversations. But for elected officials, that also means trying to implement policy changes that can certainly move the needle in the language I used in the Facebook post and that Charlie.
An accurate description of it's change is not going to come at once. It's going to come in waves, just like the attention does it. And this seems like a time when like people that have never paid attention before, in a sense, we've got more people that have awakened or are willing to look at things. It seems like we have a little more attention since I've been able to start having conversations and talk to people. I'm hearing about how their brothers or their dad or whatever had never really cared before, but you've got people's attention that you never had before, which I think brings real opportunity to move that needle. What are some of the practical things that you've had dialogues about, or you think that we can actually set as goals to try to save a life in the future, or try to have people treated more fairly in the future, or to restrain the heartless, to borrow again from your quote and specifically quoting the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King?
Yeah, so we're about to go back into the legislative session to finish the session we started this year that was interrupted by COVID, and we have 11 days left. And obviously, the world is a very different place from when we were previously in session in some respects. But I think the moment that we have is we should look at the resumption of the legislative session as an opportunity to try and do some things to address these address these issues. One of the things that I think has a very clear nexus to a murder that was here in Georgia, in Brunswick, the Ahmaud Arbery murder in February.
I just felt chills and a physical reaction at just hearing that name, which
the murder happened in February, but the video came out in late April, or sometime in mid to late April, and watching that was literally like witnessing a murder in your living room. And the same thing with George Floyd
gut-wrenching
in recent weeks. But the change in the law that I think we can do, and that sort of speaks to the Ahmaud Arbery murder, is Georgia has a citizen's arrest law that it's an antiquated law that I think dates all the way back in some form or another to 1863. And
without a question, antiquated, and
it may have served a useful purpose then, but no longer.
And first time I've heard of it, and I can say that as almost exclusively criminal law.
I do criminal law, and I did not know that law existed.
And it sounds terribly dangerous, and like it would never end well.
Well, in this sense, in this instance, it conveyed the belief that the murderers could literally take the law into their own hands and attempt to use force, in this case, lethal force with tragic consequences. And in place of the normal, law enforcement process. I mean, and the thing about the Ahmaud Arbery thing that case, I mean, he wasn't even committing a crime. You know, out for a run, and you know, there was a call to 911, and then they got in a truck, and then they pursued him and, you know, blocked him. He was trying to escape. And so the nexus to citizen's arrest is that, you know, there was a district attorney who was the second district attorney on the file from Ware County,
who had a son that was prosecuting in the Brunswick district attorney's office.
Lots of problems with the process about, you know, how the district attorneys who were initially handling the case handled it. But his, you know, the murder, for 2 months, there was no arrest. I mean, you had a shooting, you had a death, and no arrest. And the district attorney put out a memo after he actually was recused himself. They were about to transfer it to a third district attorney from Liberty County, who wound up, in his handling of the case, the arrest was, you know, made shortly after the GBI got involved. But this district attorney, the Ware County district attorney, cited the citizen's arrest law as a justification of the action of the murderers. And, you know, as a, I mean, it's troubling on a lot of levels.
Because I don't believe it for a second. I think that's what it is a justification.
It's just really, you know, I have a real hard time with being able to see how an officer of the court could, you know, take that position, not pleading the case in front of a jury, but as a justification that no probable cause for arrest existed.
It wasn't really made in the position of an advocate, where we have a duty to advocate on behalf of a client. It was done as what should be, you know, kind of an advocate for the state in a sense as the district attorney, but what should be a more objective role that is seeking the truth, right?
That's right. And so, you know, I mean, his analysis of the statute, by the way, is just completely off and inaccurate. But the existence of the statute gave cover for it. And, you know, as you guys mentioned, I mean, who's using the citizen's arrest in that, you know, who's going out and effectuating these citizens' arrests? You know?
No one. Right.
These facts that you just described, this case probably was what had the biggest effect on me, and I was scared to re-engage with the George Floyd, because this tore me up in a way, you know, like none of them had. And you know, what does it matter? But it was just like that blatant abuse of power. Because if it was any of us three unconvicted felons that had been shot down in the street, video or no video, there would have been a probable cause arrest made. Yeah. Right. You know, we're three white guys sitting right here. We're lawyers. And I'm not going to accuse you, you know, being a felon like we somehow sort of admitted to, but you know, statute of limitations, our rights and all that. But there would be an arrest made, and that, you know, that's a problem. I mean,
that was something that.
Speak to that. I mean, do you agree with that?
That was.
If it had been you, me, or Ryan.
That was what we were troubled by. Is I think that if I went out for a jog and got murdered or got shot, somebody's going to get arrested, even if they ended up being justified later.
Probable cause.
I don't see a world where if Charlie or I are murdered on a jog that there's no arrest.
The justification is a defense. You don't even consider it. I mean, at least that's what typically, you know, I see in the charging process. I mean, it doesn't have to be considered. You know, it's an affirmative defense. So,
and that's what really, like, and I know we're all.
See, I get fired up right now thinking about it.
But you know, there was that outrage that came from that, followed by George Floyd, and it's like, it was this, you know, it happened so close in time that the two tragic incidents that have really exposed it, right? And
well, and you know, and these are the instances that are on video. You know, exactly. In between those, you have another case, another murder, Breonna Taylor in Louisville, Kentucky, where
Mm-hmm.
there was a no-knock warrant, which, show up wrong place and they're not knocking, and you're somebody's literally coming in your house in a home invasion, and our partner was trying to defend them. And
that didn't get publicity for a while either, I don't think. But whether it was COVID related or otherwise,
And
it did not outside of the Louisville area. There've been several things that have come out. They had body cams, but they turned them off.
You talked about accountability earlier. We see it
Right.
all the time. Ryan can tell you about it, but personal stories about it. Probably in somewhere near Manchester area that might be in the 100 in your district. But what you spoke about accountability earlier, and this statute. What can be done with the law and making sure these body cameras are working, and if they're not, there's accountability. Because I'll just be quite honest, I believe that's a bunch of hogwash a lot of times when they say that it didn't work or it dropped. I think they turn them off, and when they're on, I think there's data and studies that show they behave differently. People behave differently. I'm behaving differently right now because I know that there's a video. I'm looking at it right now.
the question I would ask, as just let's say someone who doesn't know, policing and sheriff's offices are very local. Is there any way that is it realistic to require officers to wear body cams? I mean, is that as on a statewide, is that something that's realistic? There's budget concerns, everything I understand. I have no idea. It's easy for me to say every officer should have to wear a body cam if they're on duty, but that's a rallying cry, right? Is that something that could ever be realistic in your opinion?
And is there data to support the economic expenditure?
Well, I mean, I think that there's no question about, in terms of accountability, you get more accountability if police citizen encounters are on video, and there is a finance or economic component to that. But I think that we should set as a benchmark universal body cams. They're in patrol cars.
Yeah.
Much as standard issue when you order patrol cars. The problem with that is that they have they're on the dash. It's fixed. The shot's there, and a lot of times what transpires is outside the shot, or you don't have the audio. And if the truth of the matter is that in many instances, the body cameras can be exculpatory for.
Yeah, it can protect officers too. Yeah.
It's on video, right?
It's an investment in the truth as best we can,
right.
At least better than human memory.
So I think that the way to go about that is to, probably set a target date to give departments who do not have them presently. And a lot of departments, have gone to body cameras over the last, decade, but to set a target date that requires them so they have time to get ready and get prepared on that, and just say that that's a condition of being a qualified local government, because policing is largely a function of local. It's a local responsibility. They hire and make the budgetary decisions about their law enforcement and public safety. And that, if they have not done that and they opt to do policing without the body cameras after that target date, that they just, can't get, the grant funding and everything for their local government. And in terms of turning them off, there should be some type of, whether we put that in statute, that as to what the accountability provision is, or we provide that departments have to have some type of accountability structure for turning them off, whether that be termination, but some type of disciplinary provision, because there's no reason to switch them off, particularly for any officer citizen encounter.
Yeah.
They should be on if you have a body cam.
And that's the big frustrating. Is so often when we want them so bad, it seems like they're off, and it just happens too much to be coincidence. And it tells you that if that is the case, there is no accountability. So I would agree that some type of policy and disciplinary action would be.
I have something that's kind kind of shifting a little bit, but it goes to accountability and stuff like that. But just a unique thing, I think, that I don't know about other states, but that Georgia does, is the George Floyd incident, for example. That officer in Georgia, if he was under indictment, he would be able to go into the grand jury room.
Grand jury.
Right? Yeah,
Right.
which is like, I don't know if other states do that, but that's the only person in Georgia. If my client is being investigated by a grand jury, I can't go. He can't. He or she can't go.
No transcript.
There's no recording of it whatsoever. And I just find it interesting that for some reason there is this provision that allows them to go. I don't know the history of it.
Yeah, why does the law treat them differently?
Do you have any insight on that?
So I can't really speak to how Georgia came to have that law.
Yeah.
I mean, it is something that I'm actually in the process of working on legislation as part of our Justice for All package for when we go back to the legislative session, to remove that special treatment of law enforcement officers in the grand jury context, because it is not only does it treat police differently than anybody else who is accused of a crime in a grand jury proceeding, but it's an impediment to the prosecution of those cases, because it's not the norm, and the risk of sort of not handling it procedurally in exactly the right way. Like if you're on the fence about whether to move forward with a grand jury proceeding, you have other things, and then this is like a thumb on the scale that sort of militates in favor of, look, I'm not gonna do this. I'm not gonna present this case because I don't want to have to get to this point on the procedure and mess it up or go through that process. So, I mean, I do think that's a straightforward solution that can help. It's not the panacea. Obviously, it won't fix everything, but I think it is one of the items that we certainly.
It's just unique, right? It's a interesting.
What about
thing.
The grand jury? What's your opinion, just generally, briefly, your opinion of the grand jury system and its role or function, use, value in today's justice system? Because in 99.9% of the cases, they're just people. I mean, whoever goes in there, the officer and the representative of the district attorney's office, they're going to get what they want. That's my experience. That's my belief. I'm willing to be wrong, but you think the whole grand jury system still has a role in our justice system in securing justice, some kind of form of justice for all?
Well, I mean, I think it's something we should probably evaluate. I think the transparency piece is one of the real things that we need to look at in the grand jury process, because it's not something, it's not a transparent process. So you go and you grand jury.
I don't even think I've been in the grand jury room at the courthouse here that I've been in a million times.
Yeah.
There's some provisions like, perhaps recording the grand jury proceedings. So, there's a record that could be examined at some point, maybe, making that available to the press after or for inspection after, the grand jury is adjourned on that. But it would just provide insight and accountability. So if you're going in there and you're just doing, deliberately sorry job of presenting a case because you're not really trying to get them to return a true bill, then the record ought to show that, right?
Because I have participated in as a prosecutor grand jury proceedings, and it is certainly a opportunity where if you didn't want a true bill, or if you wanted a no bill, ultimately it is up to the grand jurors, but you certainly as a prosecutor have control of that room, right? It is the grand jurors, usually a witness, and and I think it is interesting. We have no way of knowing what happens.
Think back to, the Arbery situation we were talking about, and obviously the Ware County District Attorney did not get in front of a grand jury. But think about if he had been in front of a grand jury and, he's presenting that case. I mean, is he going to present it in a way that leads the grand jury to the conclusion that, they should issue a true bill or not. And I mean, that's very troubling to think that, that case, and I use that case because there's video, like we know what happened because everybody can watch it now. But to think that like the choice of prosecutor could make a difference in that case. And it was true in that case, think about other cases, where you don't have the video, and, obviously prosecutorial discretion is a component of our criminal justice system. But what we don't want is a situation where that discretion is used in a manner that perpetuates racial bias or is a reflection of the systemic
local biases and prejudices.
Right. Absolutely.
Well, and in that case, you had, I think, we haven't really mentioned it, but it was something that certainly I know we discussed, and maybe there's something the law can do to remedy this, because a lot of times there's not much the law can do after crime or a tragedy has occurred. But in this case, with the local law enforcement police department that was the former employer of one of the defendants in the case, one of the McMichaels, essentially had control of the investigation for a couple months. GBI wasn't called in until around the time of the video, or around the time the second DA, I think, recused himself. And that I just could not stand to reason how in our system of checks and balances, there wasn't something that would mandate calling the GBI. I know that you can get the GBI involved by request and anything, but it seems like something about that
the GBI
case,
couldn't go until they were
to the
asked
DA's
to go.
office. Could the law do anything to mandate the GBI comes in? Because then you can at least combat the local prejudices and biases and things like that, and maybe start heading towards justice a little sooner.
Background noise.
I mean, there could have been an arrest made with or without video if the GBI is called in, within a week or the first day or whatever.
Yeah, no, I think that an independent prosecution provision or an independent investigation is certainly something that we could put in the law as a requirement that would sort of bolster the confidence that you're not getting the home cooking, which was, what was certainly at play to a large extent in Brunswick. The relationship, the father, the senior McMichael had been an investigator in the Glenn County District Attorney's Office, so he certainly knew a lot of the players, including the Glenn County District Attorney herself in that case. And you cannot, I mean, that type of conflict obviously is a real issue. So there should be an automatic provision that would provide for the Georgia Bureau of Investigation to come in. The only other thing I want to say about that is that they were called in. The timing of this, they got involved only after there was public disclosure of the video. And
what's your take on that?
If that had not happened, I mean, query, how this case would have unfolded.
Charlie and I have discussed.
It took a weird route. I mean, a lawyer who had
it's what I like to call a fortunate accident is what led to the video being released.
Charlie and I have discussed the strategy behind releasing that video.
Travis Tritt's cousin.
The truth came out, but that was the catalyst for the involvement, I think, of the GBI. I mean, at that point, it was just glaringly obvious that the case needed a fresh set of investigators, fresh prosecutor, and to restore.
It completely shifted the direction, and it led to the arrest.
So, Bob, I was going to say, I know we've been on about 40 minutes, so I know you've mentioned the Justice for All package, I believe it's called. Yeah. Is there anything else you'd want to mention about? I want to be respectful of your time, but
sure, no. listen, there's another bill that that we're working on that I think is responsive to the Arbery case, but you know, and that's the issue of the stand your ground law in Georgia and the stand your ground justification. And this one is gonna be one that probably animates a lot of discussion about that. The stand your ground laws exist now. I think came in about 2006 in Georgia. And just to sort of drill down on what we're trying to do with respect to changing or repealing the stand your ground provision. I mean, what we're after is this notion that when people are in public spaces, so, you know, not at your house, you know, or on your property, but you're out in public, that you can initiate a confrontation or you can escalate a confrontation without having to step back and de-escalate or retreat from the situation. And you can use lethal force and then hide behind the stand your ground as a justification. I mean, when in those instances, stand your ground is literally a license to kill. Because it doesn't require you to demonstrate what I would call reasonable behavior in the midst of an argument or a confrontation, but rather just allows you to go and as a first instinct to use the highest form of force and not be held accountable for it. So, you know, we certainly think that and I anticipate that this is going to be an issue in the Arbery trial, that this is going to be a discussion that comes out of that, and that the defense will attempt to argue that the use of force in that was a stand your ground issue. But, you know, it shouldn't, even though they had initiated the confrontation and had chased Mr. Arbery down and tried to pin him in. And it just, the law should not work that way. I mean, everyone has a right to self-defense. You know, the Castle Doctrine, certainly have no issue with that. You should have a right to defend your home, you know, with the use of lethal force if necessary. But you know, in public spaces, it's not unreasonable to ask people to
just leave,
step back.
Yeah. Go somewhere else. Yeah.
That's right.
And there's some local cases that are still pending here where, you know, I think it was a robbery or a crime committed at, you know, a Waffle House, other places, and the folks are fleeing, and then people go to arms, and, you know, that situation where there's a loss of life. And I think all these things and these laws allow race to enter the picture and become a factor, whether it's in discretion or the way that a jury looks at it. But when the law allows for these avenues for racism to, I guess, affect the process, it's troubling. And I think that's certainly one of them, the way I see it. Is there any good, as you're looking at and trying to discuss what laws can get us, you know, move the needle, is there any good data on like race and justice and what it looks like, whether you're punished more severely if your victim is white, black, male, female, or, you know, whether or not these things happen?
That's something that Charlie and I have talked about. Is I think there's probably data on race of the defendant. You know, we have become interested in, does the victim's race play an impact?
Or just data.
If there's
Yeah,
as much
what
research
data do we have?
that.
We know it, and we talk about it, and we've talked about it in these past you know, several minutes too, with race being involved. But how do you quantify it? I mean, because that's what you need, numbers.
That's
right,
what people like you
change.
who have to make change need, right? Y'all need information.
So I think there probably are some studies out there on that topic. I know definitively on race of the victim that there are several studies in the context of the death penalty, which have looked at the race of the victim and shown that there is a tremendous disparity in the imposition of the death penalty that you know, corresponds to the race of the victim. In other words, you know, we put people, we sentence people to death more often when the victim is white than when the victim is not white. And
it seems like it probably applies to, like, a lot of other of the type of crimes too, where somebody doesn't die or where the death penalty isn't sought. Because I guess the majority are probably non-death. I was just watching something on Netflix the other day where a 16-year-old got life and somehow Kardashians were involved, but her pimp was cutthroat and he was a black man, and then the John that was her victim was a white dude. And I was just thinking, if she would have killed Cutthroat, her pimp, the black guy, I bet it would have stayed in juvenile court. But there's no data that I have to support that. But it seems like that would be extremely valuable. And I don't know what kind of changes can be made on that level. It's hard. I mean, it's got to be a real challenge to try to change the law and try to stamp out racism and its effects.
You can go back, and this is just another example at the federal level of in the federal sentencing guidelines from the 80s in the crack powder distinction. So for a very small amount of crack, the sentencing was very severe. To get a comparable level of sentencing, you'd have to have a ton of the powder,
right,
cocaine form, and that all came about in as a result of a flaw in the methodology and frankly the law that had that corresponded to race. I mean, they crack at that time was not a drug that was heavily prevalent in white communities, and so there was but cocaine powder was more prevalent, and so defendants in those cases got a break.
Yeah,
almost a blatant unfairness in the law.
Yeah. I mean, there's no. You put them on the scale in terms of the chemistry of the items, and it doesn't level out. And those are the types of those are the types of disparities in the law that we should root out. Another is that we could do, and it may be topic for a longer another conversation for a longer discussion on it is the issue of like the simple marijuana possession, like who's getting caught in those cases and what's happening to them. So there are things we can do to decriminalize a certain possession of marijuana that could probably go a long way to trying to combat some of these disparities
and hopefully preventing some more. We're wrapping up here, but one thing that I think we've talked about a little bit is I think that some of those encounters lead to things that become escalated and sometimes cause more serious encounters. And if we can try to rid ourselves of some of the contentious.
Do we really need to kick this door in the middle of the night and risk life? Do we really need to have this citizen police encounter over the smell of a little bit of marijuana that could, where an officer could have a reasonable fear that could lead to the loss of life? I mean, that happens. Yeah. But I saw something in the paper, another example of what I found to be inspiring and admirable leadership when I'm definitely thirsty for it. And I think a lot of folks are. Yesterday was the mayor in LaGrange was, advocating about a discussion about making civil penalties for marijuana because, people don't need to go to jail for a small amount, and they don't need to have the effects on their life because it does
perpetuates a system.
But there's a whole world on drugs is something that's very
probably it's probably a longer show, but
no doubt. But I mean, it's certainly something worth examining, and I think we have to think about like the consequences of the way we allocate resources in pursuit of the enforcement of these laws, and whether we should be criminalizing some of this conduct in the first instance.
Yeah. Well, Bob, is there anything else that you feel that you want to share, or Charlie? Before I know we've kept you about an hour almost.
So what we can do to try to help save lives or make things better.
I would say let's just keep the conversation going and keep the thinking and evaluation of that. I mean, as practitioners who are literally defending people and their constitutional rights in the criminal justice system every day. I mean, you guys have a perspective on what's happening that is both deep and wide, and that is it's those types of experiences and insights from your practices and your experience that will inform what we need to do in the legislature to try to make sure that we get a system that has justice for everyone on equal terms. And everybody, look, at the end of the day, I mean, I think the way to sum up the George Floyd case is, everyone should have the right to breathe. And it shouldn't be dependent on, your race. And yet we have seen with our own eyes that that's just not true in this country. And
what I'll say is, yeah, go ahead. Sorry, I mean,
and we should do better.
That's what we can talk about, changing the laws all day, but we got to start right here, I think, in the heart, and change people's. If we can just get people to treat people better, that'd be a good start, I think. Anything else?
I just thank you for your example of leadership, what it's done for me personally, and just the tireless work and the important work you're doing, and for this opportunity to have this conversation with you. We want to continue to have these kind of conversations, and I couldn't tell you how much we appreciate it.
Yes, we appreciate it very much,
especially as unconvicted felons. They have this platform and opportunity because we're not that much different, all in all. But three of us, white men, and you can't get around that. But I think we can still have these conversations, and I'm proud of the one that we've had today. And thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you for having me, and thanks for having this conversation. And look forward to coming back sometime in the future and hopefully talking about the progress we've made.
That's right. Thanks, Bob. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, guys.